Saddam Hussein pulled down, and now, more than 8 long years later, the war in Iraq is nearing its conclusion, with all US troops coming home by the end of this year. NBC News foreign correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin joins us now. Ayman, I guess the biggest anxiety for these troops and for all of us who are concerned about that region of the world is that this will descend into civil sectarian warfare. Just explain to us the division of religious groups in Iraq and why Iran is such a problem in relation to that.
Well, when you look at the composition of Iraq, there are so many different ethnic groups, each one of them aligned with somebody outside of Iraq that matters. So that even makes it that much more dangerous in the sense that you have Arab Sunnis closely aligned with Sunni Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and others. You have the Kurds in the north. You have the Shias who make up the majority of Iraq, which are about 60%. And you have Iran, which neighbors Iraq, obviously, and that's close to 90% Shias. There's a great deal of close proximity. Every group wants to look out for its own interests, wants to protect its own community and its own rights. And so that's why there's this concern that once the U.S. withdraws, which has kind of kept all these players together, that each one may now start fighting the other. And
that's what Senator Carl Levin was saying at the beginning of our broadcast, a fear that these minority religious groups will be subject to intolerance and attack. And we know that Iranians have been firing across that border over the last 10 years regularly.
There's no doubt that there has been interference in Iraq by all sides. Yes, from an American perspective, Iran is the biggest concern, but there's no doubt that they're not looking at it necessarily from an ethnic point of view. Keep in mind the other minority groups in Iraq. It's more about the resources. It's more about making sure you have a seat at the table and protecting your own communities and pockets of interest. That really is the concern. The problem is, to what extent will each community go to protect it? If you start bringing in weapons, if you start asking for separation for the Kurds, that's when you can start to see Iraq fragment, and it will become extremely volatile.
We know that there are something like almost 700,000 Iraqi security forces on the ground and at work now. But we also hear repeated reports of these security forces not acting independently and in the interest of everyone, but being divided just as the community is divided.
That's true. I mean, this is what has been a big challenge for the U.S. over the past 9 years of their involvement, is to build an Iraqi army that identifies itself first with Iraq, then with its communities. Some of the ways they've done that is they've moved battalions or brigades of one ethnic group to the north or to the south, and tried to really mix them so that they're serving with one another. That hasn't always been successful. In the north, for example, in the Kurdish part, Iraqi forces that are made up of Shias or Sunnis rarely go into the northern part because the northern part of Iraq belongs to the Kurds and they want to protect it. So yes, it's absolutely difficult to build a cohesive identity right now for Iraqis. Now, the problem is a lot of people blame the Americans for that fragmentation because all these problems were kind of kept under a lid.
By Saddam.
By Saddam in very oppressive ways. The question going forward is, can Iraq build a tolerant society with mutual respect for all these minority groups in the absence of Americans that had the overwhelming force to be able to drive it down everyone's throat, so to speak?
There's enormous relief here that these troops will be coming home, given the vast sacrifice that's been made financially and indeed in terms of the lives of people. What do you think people, ordinary families, are thinking tonight in Iraq? Are they celebrating the announcement by the president?
You know, that depends on who you ask. Iraq has paid a heavy, heavy price over the past 9 years. By some estimates, as many as 100,000 Iraqis have died. Hundreds of thousands have fled Iraq. Iraqis have paid dearly. And so some of them are going to say, is America's involvement after 9 years brought about a better Iraq? That's a very tough question. Is it on the right path? And some are going to be very concerned. Now, we can say that today's announcement by President Obama did not come as a result of an agreement. In reality, it actually came as a result of the absence of an agreement, which is that the Iraqis could not provide the Americans with immunity for their forces going forward. And so the Americans simply felt that we cannot keep our forces inside Iraq without this kind of immunity. So let's keep in mind that it's not exactly a perfect agreement. It's actually the failure of an agreement that is resulting in the withdrawal, so to speak. But Iraqis will certainly be concerned.
Ayman Mohyeldin, thank you very much for joining us.